Welcome to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas annual memberships put Sound Ideas' full range of over 600,000 sound effects, music tracks, and production elements at your fingertips, with 3 tiers to choose from based on your sound design needs. The Creator's Access Plan is perfect for the independent creator working on a smaller scale, looking for high-quality sound options at a great price. With up to 100 downloads, you'll enjoy significant savings compared to buying individual sounds. And you'll have free reign over Sound Ideas' extensive collection. Use the promo code TONEBENDERS50 for 50% off any Sound Ideas annual membership to amplify your future productions. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Timothy Muirhead and I'll be your host today as we talk about audiobooks. To most of the world, that means an audio recording of someone reading a book, but for our purposes today, we actually mean physical books that have content about sound design or working in professional audio. Books about audio rather than audio books, if that makes sense. I'm fortunate to have the authors behind 3 recent books that I've really enjoyed over the last while. These books are all going to be of interest to Tonebenders listeners, but at the same time, they're wildly different books in tone, content, and format. So this is a bit of a strange grouping, but I think that might actually be a strength for our talk today. So let's meet everyone. Joining us first today is Gina Zdanowicz, the author of the Game Audio Strategy Guide, a practical course. Gina, it's great to see you. Can you give me a quick rundown of what this book is for the listeners?
I just want to start by saying that I've been following this podcast for about 10 years, so it's an honor to be a guest here.
Wow, thanks.
Yeah, getting into the book, the Game Audio Strategy Guide, a practical course, it's a comprehensive text that provides a theoretical foundation and practical insights. So we offer a thorough look at the tools, the methods needed to create and implement industry quality music, sound, and voice production for games. The book explores the strategic layers behind crafting game audio. The text is supported by an extensive companion website, so that features numerous practical tutorials and a lot of thoughtful exercises that really aim to put the creators in the mindset to craft experiences that really resonate emotionally and elevate their storytelling. The audience, I'd say, for the Game Audio Strategy Guide is really anyone interested in creating game audio, whether they're in the industry already or if they're in the classroom preparing for a career. It was also written with the game developers in mind, where they could get a bit more insight into working with audio teams and just uncovering the workflow behind our process.
I would add to that from my point of view, when I got the book, I work in more traditional linear media. And I learned a hell of a lot reading the book because it's not something that I'm in, but, I've got a foot in kind of that world, but there's so much more depth that I don't know that it educated the hell out of me. I really enjoyed reading this book.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's good to know.
Next up, we have Emi Paternostro, author of the Pro Tools Post-Audio Cookbook, a holistic approach to post-audio workflows like music production, motion picture, and spoken word. Emi, it's great to see you. Can you give me the talking points for your book?
Yeah, so Pro Tools Audio Cookbook, as opposed to an in-depth text from start to beginning, or start to finish rather. The cookbook is designed as a series of recipes that you can pick up at different points if you want, just little step-by-step how-tos in order to complete a specific workflow or a specific task within Pro Tools. That way you can kind of peruse at your leisure the same way you would approach a recipe book for food in that sense.
I also really enjoyed this book because, I've been working for a long time in this industry, and you get set in your ways of how I do things. And then I'm going through your book and I'm like, well, goddamn, why don't I do it that way? That's so simple. Definitely in a couple places, I went from, 3 steps to 2 steps or 4 steps to 1 step kind of thing with just things that, you get ingrained in how you do it. And to see someone else doing it is always helpful. Finally, we have both authors of The Art of Sound, Creativity in Film Sound and Electroacoustic Music, Andrew Knight-Hill and Emma Margetson. Tell us what the reader would find in your book. Do you want to take that first, Andrew?
Hi, yes, thank you so much. Yeah, again, it's amazing to be here, to be part of the podcast and to talk about our book. So we are really interested in the process of creativity. What inspires people? How do they make those creative decisions? So not so much worrying about which plugin you choose to use, but deciding how do you tell stories? How do you really get to the heart of why you choose to do something and how you choose to approach a creative process? So Emma and I both composers of electroacoustic music, which is music made from sound recordings, treating any sound as a kind of form of musical material. And what we realized is that there wasn't that much dialogue between our field and people working in sound design. So we wanted to do something about that. We wanted to get people together to make them talk to one another and to share their creative approaches.
Emma, did you want to add to that?
Part of it was about fostering those dialogues and also increasing that greater appreciation of the artistry in sound practice. So if you read the book, you'll discover an array of interviews and discussions that we had with a range of post-production, film, sound and electroacoustic music composers. And it really is about embracing diverse ideas and approaches. And as Andrew says, really celebrating the creative process and the levels of creativity and those principles that underpin what we do.
Yeah, definitely. I think like Gina said, that she wanted her book to be for games makers. I think we hope that our book will be useful for directors and anyone that's trying to understand what sound people do. We don't want to be thought of just as technical people. I think we want to be thought of as creative people. And so our hope is that by talking about creativity, we can foreground that and let people know that we're really artists involved in making, not just technicians coming on at the end.
Let's talk about the process of writing a book for a little bit. Gina, how did you go about coming up with the idea and even the format for your book?
The format, that's a great question. So Spencer, my co-author, and I started thinking about the idea of writing a book that sort of feels like a course and has broken down into different modules. And we started by really looking at who would we want our intended audience to be. That background in academia had us break the book down into a modular structure. It's a pretty hefty book. It's 400 plus pages. We cover everything from the creative, technical, and the business side. So we laid out those 4 distinct chapters where the creative side is broken down into sound design and music. And then we did a deep dive into their respective contexts. Then we figured out that those chapters needed to be broken down into digestible chunks. So it wasn't just this wall of text, just for you to read. So we spent a lot of time working out details and table of contents. And we really put an emphasis on balancing the theory and the practice. So we built in opportunities for readers to pause at the end of a section and kind of reflect on what they learned after reading it. So we added in some reflective questions, some exercises. We also had visiting artist section where colleagues of ours would share their thoughts on specific topics. So you get another point of view, not just ours. And then after we laid out all of those chapters, we thought about the idea that, 400 pages is a lot to just jump into. People would really have to love it to keep going. So we decided that this would be like a resource guide. And we came up with our Getting Started chapter, which really gives the reader our thoughts on how to approach the book, how to use it as a resource guide, how to jump around and then get the most out of it.
Emmy, did you want to talk about the format for your book?
Oh, I was fortunate in that I didn't really have to develop the format, so to speak. It was presented to me by the publisher. So the publisher reached out to me as an audio professional who had also written just one-off kind of blogs and articles about my workflows. They reached out and they said, hey, we want to create this book. They initially wanted a very, very in-depth. They wanted everything to do with Pro Tools, everything you could possibly imagine from start to finish. And I'm like, well, that's going to be 2,000 to 3,000 pages. So let's focus a little bit more. And so we focused specifically on post-audio. And then from there, I thought about my own workflow from start to finish, which I broke down into this kind of plan, ingest, organize, edit, enhance, export. So these kind of 6 stages of post-production with a few extra chapters at the end tacked on for the specific mediums you might be working on, whether it is music, motion picture, or spoken word. The idea was when writing these chapters is that these should not be something that you have to read from front to back, that you should just be at any point able to pick a specific workflow that you're curious about or you wanted to enhance your own or just see another way of doing it and kind of go through it, and it stands alone on its own. So there's a very didactic, very step-by-step, do this, then do this, then do this, followed by why you should be doing that or how it actually works, reviewing what we've done.
Emma, so your book is got a different kind of focus. So I imagine figuring out how to approach it would have been a much more difficult task, maybe? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, it began with really thinking about the why and the who and how is best to approach it, and the range of practitioners, sound artists, composers that we got involved and asked to be part of these discussions. In total, I think it ended up being about 26 hours of interviews on the whole, which was quite a lot, to then be able to kind of unpack and really discuss what were those key themes, what came out of that, but also really thinking beforehand about, okay, what questions do we want to ask? And so these were practitioners and specialists that we also paired together. So say, for instance, we had Hildegard Westerkamp, who was paired with Anne Krober. So they had some form of similarity and connection with their practices and possibly their ways of working. What we thought may have been a book more about distinctions and differences was actually more a book about actually those similarities.
So for us, I think the idea was inspired by an article called Stockhausen versus the Technocrats, which is in a book called Audio Cultures, where they basically created this exchange between this famous German kind of modernist composer, Stockhausen, and kind of more modern electronic artists like Aphex Twin and Squarepusher. And they basically ended up having this argument over letters that they'd written back towards one another. We didn't want to create arguments, but we wanted to create this dialogue. And I think we thought that we were just doing interviews and we were just going to publish a book of interviews. But what we realized was that the conversations that Emma and I were having at the end of the interviews afterwards, where we were drawing connections between the different conversations that we'd had with different people, was really, really fascinating and interesting to us. And we suddenly realized there's so much more interesting here about comparing and connecting these conversations into something bigger. So we ended up taking this book that was originally supposed to be a series of different interviews and ended up kind of writing another half of the book, I guess, which annoyed the publisher because we ended up delaying by about 9 months or something. But I think the result is much, much stronger than it would have been otherwise.
And probably what's important to say as well is that from that kind of analysis, drawing out, okay, what were those key themes that were discussed? We created this map of sonic creativity that can be found, or you can download it as an e-resource, but then as a way that as creatives or as makers, you can then take parts of that. Whether you're a beginner or whether, you're a specialist, but as a way of thinking about your creative decision-making, or you can use it as kind of markers or waypoints to take you through different routes or steps along your journey.
And I think the non-linear, again, is really important to kind of reference back to, what Gina was talking about and Emi as well. Like, we didn't want to create something that would just be read from start to finish. We wanted something that would make sense if you dived in halfway through. So you can just pick up the book and just dive straight into the individual interviews. You can say, what does Paula Fairfield say? What does Randy Tom say? Although, of course, you probably heard all about what they want to say from this podcast anyway. But you can dive onto that, read that. But then you can hear about our analysis if you want. But if you don't want to hear anything of what we have to say, then that's fine as well. You can just read what the important people have to say.
That actually kind of leads into a question I wanted to ask you about. The idea of writing a book about sound, by default, automatically means you're putting yourself in the role of an expert. The phrase imposter syndrome that comes with that, did you have any trouble kind of getting over that, or was that not an issue for any of you? Emi, do you want to talk about that first?
There was a couple of times that I struggled with, I'm putting onto paper my workflow, my processes that I've been using for many years, and I've tried to adapt and improve over time, but it's like, I was scared. It's kind of like sometimes too, when we talk about with our industry professionals, people asking like, how do you do this? How do you do that? I'm like, sometimes I'm kind of scared to say, well, I just use this one plugin and it does everything for me. And it's just like, you kind of like showing how the sausage gets made, It's like sometimes people don't want to know that, or sometimes you feel like a little bit of a phony by using these tools. But ultimately, as I was writing the book, I realized that it's not so much about using the tools, it's about knowing when to use those tools that's important, and when to actually apply certain processes and certain workflows. So over time, I was able to kind of reconcile with that. It's like, you know what, it's there on paper. This is who I am, how I work. I opened in the book with my introduction, like, this is not necessarily the best way to do something, but this is the way I do it. And hopefully that opens up some eyes and some ears.
Gina, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like what Emi said resonates with our book. We got excited when we landed the publishing deal. And then as we started to write, that feeling of, are we worthy? Can we do this? It creeps in. I think at the time I had been doing this for about 15 years or so. I looked at that experience and my achievements, and I practiced a little self-compassion, right? And we made it clear and evident in the book that we want you to hear other voices. So that's why we introduced the visiting artist section, where colleagues and other experts in the field come in and give their view. And that view can be conflicting, and we left it in the book, even if it was, because that's really what it's all about, right? So Tim, you mentioned early on that, the idea of reading the book and, coming from a more linear format, getting an understanding and, things of that nature. I think it's nice to kind of spread the word of like, look, this is how it's done. In this case here, we're doing a lot of like, people are siloed in their own remote studios, and it can be pretty difficult to get that experience. So we really just kind of tried to push past any, imposter syndrome thoughts and be confident in the fact that we were just sharing our workflow, our thoughts, but reminding people to continue to listen to the words of others.
Andrew, you brought this question on by saying if you only want to listen to the smart people, or however you worded it, I can't remember. But like, obviously you don't think that, or you wouldn't be putting your thoughts in a book to begin with.
Well, I think, for us as well, just like Gina and Emi have said, we wanted to show that there are many different ways to get to the answer, and that there's no right or wrong, but there are just choices, creative choices that you make, which get you to the end. So I think for us, we wanted to celebrate that creative diversity and the fact that everybody can do it their own way. Because in the past, I think I have felt that sometimes people can be quite guarded about their processes, like Emi was saying. They can worry about, oh gosh, if I tell them how to do this, then I make a fraud maybe, or maybe they'll steal it and run off and do with it. But my argument would be, well, actually, no, we're all individuals. We're all going to approach creative processes in much more complex, nuanced way than that. I might find Emi's got the best plugin, which it sounds like he does. He's got this amazing plugin that fixes all his problems. I want that. But just because I have that plugin doesn't mean that if we both got the same brief, that we would end up creating the same result at the end. And that, for me, is fascinating. We do this project here with our students where we give them all the same film clip. And at the end, we did a concert, and you sat there and we played like these 3-minute pieces, probably about 20 of them. And only at the end did we tell the audience that these were all soundtracks composed to the same film clip. And it blew people's minds because they were all so different, so many different choices and approaches. And that's what I love about it. And that's what I think is really exciting about humans and their ability to be creative. And that's what we wanted to get out, to get people more open, more keen to discuss and share with others, which I think is also what this podcast does as well.
Certainly, that's one of the goals. It's interesting. I don't normally get to talk about the idea of imposter syndrome in this context very much, but like just doing this podcast is something. Why do people want to listen to me talk about sound with these people? So it is definitely something that I think every individual has to just push through and figure out how to find their voice within that.
I think we also didn't realize that maybe universities are scary and that people that work in universities are scary.
Very true.
Here we are, like getting online to talk to people, and sometimes they initially come with the PR, whatever they've been taught. Then we would kind of ask them a weird left field question about their creative process, and you could see suddenly they'll go, oh, wait a minute, these people are not just here to do a kind of journalistic interview. They're actually weird sound people too. They get it. Well, I suppose that's the interesting thing for us. We're sat there feeling imposter, saying, oh God, were we going to know what to ask Randy or Paula? But then actually you get into it and you suddenly realize, actually you do connect with one another through that shared love of sound.
The other nice thing about talking to people that work in sound is it's a pretty great community. Everyone's really nice. I'm sure you went through this, Andrew and Emma, the same way I've gone through it over times, where I'm like, oh, this person's, won an Oscar or is very successful in some way. And do they want to talk to little old me? And then you find out that, yeah, they just want to nerd out about sound.
Totally. Yeah. People were so generous, and we're so grateful to everybody for taking the time out of their schedules. As Emma said, I think in total, we did about 27 or 30 hours of interviews with people. And sometimes people were tricky to pin down, and it was like really hard to get them. But actually, tell you what, once you got them going, sometimes you couldn't shut them up. They just wanted to keep talking, which was brilliant. Yeah, we were just there loving it.
It's interesting that you say it's hard to pin people down, because in some way, shape, or form, we've been trying to get this exact conversation going for like 2 years, basically. And through various schedules of us all, it just never happened until now. So I want to also just say, this is awesome that we finally all got together, because we've been working on it for forever. Much of that delay was my fault. Sorry about that. But one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is the idea that as we're in the industry, talking about sound is really difficult when you're like sitting down with a director or something like that, and they want a different sound but can't articulate what this new sound is. I can only imagine that writing about sound adds a whole extra complexity, because it's all on the page. You don't get additive hand gestures and stuff when communicating in person. Did that add an extra layer to the difficulty of all this, Gina?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we were thinking about how do we approach this and how do we put the words down on paper, we really had to consider, how sort of layperson's terms do we get? How easy do we go with the technical language versus like how do we give enough of that? There was a really difficult balance there, and I think we kind of went back and explained that in the getting started section, because we really wanted to dive deep into like the technical aspects of things, like the implementation, the resource management and optimization that goes into balancing, nonlinear audio within a game. I think we felt like we needed to find a good place to balance the pros in the industry that wanted to come and see our approach versus someone that's brand new to the industry. What kind of helped us balance that a bit was, having the glossary of terms at the end of the book, which kind of added on to the number of pages. But then also, we thought the idea is that we're going to have our companion site, and we did a lot of like breaking down some of the harder stuff, some of the more difficult things, making it a little bit more digestible by adding a little bit more asynchronous elements that people can go back and check, or they can look things up. I think that sort of helped us in that process.
Emi?
It's really difficult to write about sound. At least it was for me. So especially as a training guide, as a this is how you're supposed to do something. I have trained people, I've taught people how to do things in Pro Tools, and it was like second nature for me. If you sit down next to me and I've got the board in front of you, or I've got the DAW in front of you, I could say, okay, click here, do this, do that. Some of the work that I do here, or that I work in education, is often like a good rule of thumb is to sit on your hands, like don't actually touch the person's work or the screen. You want to find a way to describe things to them so that they can try and figure it out for themselves. But then trying to translate that onto paper, into words, extremely challenging. Thankfully, for myself, I had a great team of technical reviewers who were able to then look at the recipes as I was writing them and then give me feedback when things didn't make sense. And so part of it was trying to figure it out, and then also getting that feedback. The editorial process was extremely important for that, in order to say, yeah, what you've written actually makes sense for the average person to figure out how to actually get it done.
The technical reviewers were really vital to our process. We picked people in the industry, and we had to have quite a few of them because we covered so many different sections. So we found people that were the experts in business side, and the composers, and the orchestrators, the sound designers. One part of the book that I'm proud of is the sound design section. We have this process of breaking down sound design in a way that fits, that like a musician can look at it and say, I can approach sound design. And so we came up with this whole like layering, transient staging, frequency slotting, and effects processing. And, we were kind of taking some terms that we've, heard around the industry and putting it into a process. And we had to ask people, does this make sense, or does it make us sound really silly? I'm always grateful for them because they were really vital to our process in getting this book done and shipped.
It can be really hard. It's really hard to articulate in general sometimes, to really be able to kind of describe a sound in a particular situation or experience. And obviously we listen in very different ways too, depending on the context.
That's why then it was really useful that we sometimes came back to people and we did a second interview and we were able to say, now last time we were talking about this and we don't really understand this. Can we talk about this a bit more? So we were able to kind of dig into more deeply certain points in the discussion and really dive into them. But as Emma said, it was a bit of a jigsaw puzzle trying to put things together. I absolutely love Post-it notes. I should probably have shares in Post-it notes. Basically, we just covered the entire wall of our office with all these sticky notes. And gradually we started to realize, there's some of these things are similar, some of them overlap. And that's how we ended up kind of coalescing this map down. And one of the best things that we've had afterwards is one of the people we interviewed is Nina Hartstone. She said to us that having gone through the process of having the discussions with us, that it's really helped her to talk to her team and to create discussions among her colleagues about the sound and what their intention is and what they're trying to do. And for us, that's just amazing. You know, that's exactly what we did this project for, was to kind of create those conversations and those dialogues. And I probably should say as well that I think that where the electroacoustic music, to come back to that weird, strange thing that exists, a lot of it that exists is only in the world of universities. And both Emma and I are really passionate about communicating and breaking beyond the universities to share this music practice. So there are people that have been writing for 50, 60 years about music and sound practices, and there's a massive language and literature that's all around it that's about articulating and describing sound. And so I think part of what we see our mission is through this book is to kind of take some of that knowledge about talking about and thinking about sound and share it, because maybe some of it's just too crazy and complicated, but there are elements of it that are perhaps really useful. And I'm really pleased that that started to come through with some of the responses that we've had from people about the book.
You mentioned earlier the idea of being intimidated by the whole university side of sound. That is something that was going through my head when I got the book and started cracking the pages. Like, is this going to be too, I don't know if over my head is the right phrase, but it's not written that way. It's written in a way that ties things together that I know and I didn't know and makes me think about things in new ways, which is obviously, I assume your goal, but obviously what my goal was when reading it as well.
Great. That's really important. And like Gina and Emi said, it's so important if anyone's thinking about writing a book is to really think about the reader. I think sometimes this electroacoustic music has hidden itself and it's pretended to be this all powerful thing that's, it's just not for people like you. For us, we're like, no, this is for everyone. Like there's no point in this music if it's not heard by people. And actually, we want it to be open and more engaging. There was a long process of rewriting chapters. So we'd written it out and then you kind of come back to it and you go, whoa, this is way too complicated. How can we boil it down? How can we simplify it? How can we get away? Just like Gina said, how can we get back to the core essence of what we're trying to share? Because it's no use. If people can't understand it, then you've lost the game.
I'm curious to know how much time goes into writing one of these books. Emi, do you want to talk about how long a period of time went between when you first were reached out to and when the book went to press?
It was a very fast process for me, about 1 year. Yeah, and this is because of the actual publisher. This is their MO. They like to get things out quickly. They initially wanted a 6-month turnaround, and I thought I could get that done, but because I have full-time work, basically it was every night for 2 or 3 hours for a year to get the book written. I know some of my colleagues who've written a textbook that took like 3 or 4 years or more.
Gina, how long for you?
It was about a 2-year process, and that's including the two of us writing. But I'd say from the time where we were in negotiation with the publisher to getting started to write, and then getting to the end to publishing it, it was just about a little over 2 years. So it's quite an undertaking. I can't imagine Emi doing 1 year, getting it all done and out there.
There's something as well too in terms of the universality or the evergreen nature of the books that you're both writing. Whereas if I write the Pro Tools 2024 cookbook, it's already out of date.
Yes.
Yeah.
With all the different versions coming out. Yeah.
Andrew or Emma?
So for us, I think we took about 9 months, I think, to do all the interviews. We started in the autumn of 2021 and came through into the spring of 22. And then, well, we took a lot of time to tidy them up and work out. And I think it was, that kind of autumn of 22 that we suddenly realized that we had there was something more interesting there than just publishing the interviews. I think we took basically another year or another 9 months to write the kind of more analysis of what everyone had said. And then, then the book came out just in time for Christmas.
I was just going to say, and just thinking in terms of, there was 26 hours or so, however many hours it was, that were then transcribed, that was then edited, and then it was edited again, but also edited in the terms of the sense of simplifying it for the reader to make it as easy to read as possible and to be as clear as possible, to really articulate what each contributor was really trying to say in the most meaningful and effective way, on top of then doing all of our own analysis and everything else. And there was a lot of pastries consumed and a lot of coffee consumed and quite a few late nights in the process.
I think that's a good warning, Emma. Definitely think twice before you do a book of interviews. It turns out that your brain is really amazing at decoding what people say when they speak to you. When you look at it transcribed on the page, it's just like word spaghetti. It's just chaos. So a lot of work, but I think part of that process of really digging into the interviews in such depth is where that kind of richness of the analysis came out. So it was worth it in the end.
If anybody else is also thinking about writing a book, what both of your books had as an advantage was a partner to write with, or a writing
that's a good shout.
Team, somebody. So for myself, I'm very thankful to my wife, which every night I was supposed to go down and write, and I'd flop on the couch and say, I don't feel like doing it, and she'd kick me. So it's always good to have somebody coaching you through it.
That's where the coffee and the pastries came in for us in the morning before we got going for the day.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like an absolutely enormous amount of work, time, effort, and determination went into all these books. As someone who's read them, thanks for putting in all that effort. If anyone listening wants to purchase any of these books, you'll be able to find links on the episode page at tonebenderspodcast.com. There should be a link in the episode description in your podcast app. In particular, if you're interested in the Game Audio Strategy Guide by Gina, you can find a link and a 20% discount code on the episode page. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. I had a lot of fun talking with you all.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Sound Ideas annual memberships put Sound Ideas' full range of over 600,000 sound effects, music tracks, and production elements at your fingertips. With 3 tiers to choose from based on your sound design needs. The Creator's Access Plan is perfect for the independent creator working on a smaller scale, looking for high-quality sound options at a great price. With up to 100 downloads, you'll enjoy significant savings compared to buying individual sounds. And you'll have free reign over Sound Ideas' extensive collection. Use the promo code TONEBENDERS50 for 50% off any Sound Ideas annual membership to amplify your future productions. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support. Thanks for listening.